Billionaire goes undercover in his restaurant, helps struggling employee fight cancer. Ethan Carter was used to power. He built his restaurant empire from the ground up, turning a single diner into a multi-million-dollar chain known for its quality and heart. But lately, something felt off. His executives talked about efficiency and profit margins, but he wondered, had they lost sight of the people who made it all possible? That's what led him here, standing in the cramped break room of one of his own restaurants, dressed as a middle-aged line cook. The kitchen smelled of sizzling butter and grilled steak, a scent that once fueled his ambition. Now, he was just Ethan Hayes, a new hire trying to blend in. "You knew?" a voice asked. Ethan turned to see a young woman, no older than 23, with deep brown eyes and tired features. Her name tag read Maggie. She wore a slightly oversized uniform, and her apron was frayed at the edges as if she'd been too busy to replace it. "Yeah," Ethan said, keeping his cover. "Just started today." Maggie gave him a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the chaos." She nodded toward the swinging doors. "Better get ready. The dinner rush gets brutal." As the evening unfolded, Ethan saw what she meant. The kitchen was a war zone, orders flying in, plates stacking up, the air thick with heat and stress. Maggie moved like she'd done this 1,000 times, flipping patties, plating dishes, dodging scalding oil without missing a beat. But every now and then, Ethan noticed a slight wince, a hesitation, like she was in pain. "You okay?" he asked at one point, handing her a freshly grilled steak. She nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired." But Ethan had been in business long enough to know when someone was hiding something. And Maggie? She was hiding something big. During their 10-minute break, Maggie sat in the corner, sipping from a water bottle, staring at nothing in particular. Ethan hesitated before sitting across from her. "You work here full-time?" he asked. She nodded. "Double shifts most days. Gotta pay the bills." Ethan frowned. "What about school?" Maggie let out a breathy laugh. "Not really in the cards for me." There was something in the way she said it, like she'd long since given up on the idea. Ethan wanted to press further, but a manager walked in, calling everyone back to the kitchen. For the rest of the shift, Ethan watched Maggie closely. He noticed the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking, the way she had to pause sometimes, gripping the counter like she was steadying herself. By closing time, she looked pale, exhausted. Then, just as she stepped out of the back door, Ethan saw her knees buckle. Without thinking, he rushed to her side, catching her before she hit the ground. "Maggie," she blinked rapidly, forcing herself to stand. "I'm fine," she muttered, but her voice was weak. "No, you're not." For a moment, Maggie looked like she wanted to argue. But then, her expression shifted, resignation, exhaustion, something deeper. She exhaled, long and slow. Then she whispered the words that made Ethan's stomach drop. "I have cancer." Ethan felt the weight of Maggie's words settle over him like a thick fog. "I have cancer." The words echoed in his mind as he watched her lean against the brick wall, her body trembling from exhaustion. A flickering street lamp above them cast a pale glow over her face, revealing just how sick she looked, pale, hollow-eyed, and too young to carry something this heavy. But she wasn't looking for pity. That much was clear. Her expression was guarded, like she regretted saying anything at all. Ethan cleared his throat. "How long have you—" "About a year," she interrupted. "It started as fatigue, then dizziness. By the time they found it, it was already." She hesitated, wrapping her arms around herself. Too late for easy options. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. "Treatment?" Maggie let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Chemo's expensive. I work doubles just to keep a roof over my head. Insurance covers some, but not enough. And even if I could afford it, I can't take time off. I have rent, bills." She shrugged. "So I just keep going." Ethan clenched his fists. A girl this young, barely starting her life, was forced to make an impossible choice. Work or treatment. Survival or survival. "That's insane," he muttered. "That's reality," she corrected. A silence stretched between them. Ethan wanted to say something, anything, but nothing felt right. He had the power to fix this. He could write a check tonight, make this problem disappear. But if he did, she'd know who he was. And he wasn't ready for that yet. He needed to understand more, and he needed to help in a way that didn't make her feel like a charity case. The next few days, Ethan worked harder than he ever had in his life. The job was brutal, long hours, grease burns, aching muscles, but it was nothing compared to what Maggie endured. She never complained, never asked for help. She just showed up and worked herself to the bone. But Ethan noticed the signs, the way she clenched her jaw against pain, how she sometimes gripped the counter to steady herself, the moments she thought no one was watching and let exhaustion sink into her bones. One evening after a grueling shift, Ethan found her in the break room, sitting on the floor with her back against the lockers. She was staring at her phone, a deep crease in her forehead. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. Maggie hesitated, then turned the phone toward him. It was a medical bill, $4,000, overdue. Ethan swallowed hard. "They said if I don't pay by next week, I can't get my next round of treatment." She exhaled shakily. "I've been trying to pick up extra shifts, but it's not enough." Ethan felt a mix of anger and helplessness. How was it that in a company he owned, one of his employees was drowning like this? He could fix this in an instant. But he knew Maggie. If he handed her money, she'd refuse it. She wasn't looking for a savior. She just needed a fighting chance. And he had an idea. The next morning, Ethan arrived early and called a private meeting with the general manager, Brian. "I need to talk to you about Maggie," he said, keeping his voice level. Brian scoffed. "What about her?" Ethan studied the man carefully. He was in his mid-40 seconds, sharp-eyed, and always seemed more concerned with the bottom line than his employees. "She's one of the hardest workers here, but I heard she's struggling." Ethan chose his words carefully. "She could use some help. Maybe there's something we can do?" Brian rolled his eyes. "Look, she's a good kid, but this is a business. If she can't handle the workload, that's on her." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She has cancer." His voice came out sharper than he intended. Brian's expression didn't change. "And? Life's tough. I've got employees with families to feed. If I start bending rules for one person, everyone will expect special treatment." Ethan felt his blood boil. This man ran his restaurant, his company, with zero compassion. "You could at least try," Ethan snapped. "Offer her some paid leave, start a fundraiser. Hell, even just check in on her once in a while." Brian folded his arms. "Listen, Ethan, was it? You seem like a nice guy, but you don't get how things work here. We're not running a charity." Ethan took a slow breath. He had seen enough. He wasn't just going to help Maggie. He was going to change everything. That evening, Ethan stayed late, scrubbing the grill alongside Maggie. "I heard you're behind on treatment payments," he said casually. Maggie sighed. "Yeah, but I'll figure it out." Ethan hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I might have an idea. Have you ever thought about doing a fundraiser?" She let out a short laugh. "A fundraiser? Who's gonna donate to some random line cook?" "You'd be surprised," Ethan said. "What if the restaurant helped? A charity night, half the proceeds go to your treatment. Customers love a good cause." Maggie looked at him, skepticism flickering in her tired eyes. "And why would the restaurant do that?" Ethan shrugged. "Because people care more than you think." She bit her lip, considering. For the first time in a while, Ethan saw something in her expression. Hope. "Okay," she said softly. I guess it's worth a shot." Ethan nodded, already forming a plan in his mind. He would make sure the fundraiser happened. He would make sure Maggie got every dollar she needed. And if his managers weren't willing to help, he'd remind them who really owned this place. Maggie had always been skeptical of Hope. It had let her down too many times before. But when Ethan suggested a fundraiser, something inside her shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to finally breathe. Still, she couldn't ignore the nagging voice in her head. Why would he care so much? She had known Ethan for only a few weeks, yet he had shown her more kindness than most people had in years. He worked alongside her like he truly understood what it meant to be exhausted, broke, and barely hanging on. But there was something about him, something that didn't quite fit. She had seen the way he studied everything, like he was taking notes in his head. He wasn't just another burnt-out line cook. He was something else, but she didn't have the energy to solve that mystery. She had bigger things to worry about, like the fact that she was running out of time. To her surprise, the restaurant's corporate office approved the fundraiser. A flyer went up near the entrance. "Help support our team member Maggie. Join us this Saturday. 50% of proceeds will go toward her medical bills." The staff rallied behind her. Some offered to spread the word. Others volunteered to stay late to help. Even customers started noticing, leaving larger tips and asking how they could donate. For the first time in a long time, Maggie felt like maybe she wasn't alone. And Ethan? He had a fire in his eyes, like this meant as much to him as it did to her. But Brian, the general manager, wasn't pleased. The night before the event, Maggie overheard an argument in the back office. "This is a bad look for us," Brian was saying. "If customers see one of our workers begging for money, what does that say about the company?" "It says we take care of our own," Ethan shot back. Maggie froze outside the door. Brian scoffed. "It's a charity stunt. People will donate out of guilt, and then what? We're stuck with an employee who can't pull her weight." Ethan's voice was dangerously calm. "Are you saying she's a burden?" "I'm saying we run a business, not a hospital. Maybe it's time she steps down." Maggie's stomach dropped. Brian continued, "She can't work full shifts. She's slower than the others. If we're being honest, she shouldn't even be here." Ethan's voice turned ice cold. "You have no idea who you're talking about." There was a long silence. Then Brian scoffed again. "You're getting too attached, Ethan. You should focus on doing your job instead of playing hero." Maggie had heard enough. She turned and rushed down the hallway before they could see her. Her hands were shaking. She had known she was hanging by a thread, but hearing it spelled out so bluntly, it cut deep. She wasn't sure if she should be more hurt or angry. The night of the fundraiser, the restaurant was packed. People lined up out the door, filling tables and leaving generous donations. Some customers told Maggie they had seen her story online. Others simply smiled and said, "We're rooting for you." Maggie worked through her exhaustion, smiling through the pain. But just as she started to believe things were turning around, Brian walked up with a blank expression. "Maggie, can I see you in my office?" The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She followed him, her heart pounding. Brian shut the door behind her and leaned against his desk. "Listen, I know tonight's a big deal, but let's be real. You can't keep doing this. You're not fit to work in a high-pressure environment anymore." Maggie felt like she had been punched in the gut. "You're firing me?" "I'm letting you go," Brian corrected. "It's not personal. It's just business." Her hands curled into fists. "Not personal?" This job had been her lifeline. It had kept her afloat, paid for what little treatment she could afford. Now, after everything, they were just tossing her aside. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Thanks for the reminder," she said coldly. "I almost forgot what people like you are really like." She turned to leave, but the door swung open before she could reach it. Ethan stood in the doorway. And this time, he wasn't just some quiet, unassuming cook. His expression was sharp, unforgiving. And then, he said the words that shattered everything Maggie thought she knew. "You're done here, Brian." Brian blinked. "Excuse me?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "You're fired." Maggie's stomach flipped. "What?" Brian scoffed. "You don't have the authority to." But Ethan reached into his back pocket, pulled out a sleek black wallet, and tossed it onto the desk. A business card slid out. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan Carter, founder and CEO." Brian's face turned ghost white. Maggie couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She stared at Ethan, her mind racing. Ethan Carter, the billionaire restaurant mogul. Her boss, the man who had been standing beside her in a grease-stained apron, scrubbing dishes and flipping burgers. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Brian finally found his voice. "Ethan, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," Ethan cut in. "You just fired one of the best employees in this restaurant, and you did it because you see people as numbers." His jaw tightened. "This company was built on the idea that no one gets left behind. And you've made it clear you don't share that vision." Brian swallowed hard. I want you gone by the end of the night," Ethan said firmly. "And I'll make sure your replacement actually cares about the people who work here." Brian's mouth opened and closed, but he must have realized he had no way out. With one final glare, he stormed out of the office. Silence filled the room. Maggie felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. "You're Ethan Carter?" she finally whispered. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Yeah." Her knees felt weak. "So, this whole time, I wanted to see the truth," he admitted, "to understand what my employees go through. And I saw you, fighting, pushing through, giving more than anyone should have to." His voice softened. "I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Maggie stared at him, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." Ethan gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Then don't say anything yet," he said gently, "because I'm not done helping you." Maggie stood in the office, staring at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. The Ethan she had known, The hardworking, kind, and determined line cook was gone. In his place stood Ethan Carter, Billionaire CEO, and the owner of the very restaurant she had been fighting to survive in. Her mind reeled. "You're really him?" she finally whispered. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to see things for myself, what it's really like for the people working in my restaurants." He exhaled, and what I found, it wasn't right. Maggie crossed her arms. "So, what now? You fire Brian, play the hero, and disappear back into your world of luxury?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "No, I didn't go undercover just to walk away." He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "Maggie, I didn't do this for some business experiment. I did it because people like you deserve better, and if I can change that, I will." Her heart clenched. She wanted to believe him, but life had taught her that rich men didn't come down from their towers to save people like her. Ethan studied her face and sighed. "Come with me." "What?" "I want to show you something." Maggie hesitated, but there was something in his voice, something real. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Ethan led her out of the office, past the bustling restaurant, and into the cold night air. A sleek black car waited at the curb, but he waved it off. Instead, he walked beside her down the street, in silence. After a few blocks, they arrived at a building Maggie had never noticed before. It wasn't flashy, just a simple, well-maintained space with a sign that read, "Carter Foundation, Community Support Center." Ethan pushed open the door, leading her inside. The moment Maggie stepped in, her breath caught. The place was warm and inviting. There was a food pantry stocked with fresh groceries, a room filled with cozy chairs and books, a bulletin board covered in flyers for job assistance, financial aid, and medical resources. Ethan turned to her. "This is one of the programs my company funds. It helps employees who are struggling, whether it's medical bills, housing, or just needing a second chance." Maggie swallowed hard. I didn't know this existed." "Most don't," Ethan admitted. "But that's going to change." He faced her fully. "I don't want to just fix your situation, Maggie. I want to fix the system that forced you into it." Her throat tightened. "Why do you care so much?" Ethan hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I know what it's like to struggle." Maggie blinked. "You? The billionaire?" He smiled slightly. "I didn't start out this way. I grew up in a single-parent home. My mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us fed. I remember watching her skip meals so I could eat." His voice grew thick with emotion. "She was strong, but she never should have had to fight that hard just to survive." Maggie's chest ached. Ethan continued, "That's why I built my company. I wanted to create jobs, give people opportunities. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what was happening on the ground." He shook his head. "Brian and people like him, they let profits matter more than people. I won't let that happen again." Maggie stared at him, trying to process everything. Then Ethan turned to her with a gentle smile. "That's why I have a proposal for you." She raised an eyebrow. "A proposal?" "I want to cover your medical expenses completely. No strings attached." Maggie's heart stopped. "Ethan, wait," he interrupted. "I know you don't want charity. That's why I'm not just offering money, I'm offering you a job." Maggie frowned. "I have a job?" "You had a job," Ethan corrected. Brian made sure of that. His expression softened. "But I don't just want you flipping burgers, Maggie. You have more to offer than that. I want you to help me fix this company." Maggie's stomach flipped. "What?" "You've seen the cracks in the system firsthand," Ethan explained. "You know what it's like to be overworked and undervalued. I need someone like you, someone who actually understands, to help me rebuild our employee support programs. You could help make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Maggie's lips parted, but no words came out. This didn't feel real. A week ago, she had been preparing to lose everything. Now this man, this billionaire, was offering to not only save her life but give her a purpose. Her gut instinct was to say no, to push him away. But what if this was real? What if she actually had a chance to make a difference? Ethan watched her carefully. "No pressure. The choice is yours." Maggie took a shaky breath. "I need to think." Ethan nodded. "Take all the time you need." That night, Maggie lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her life had been a series of battles. She had always been the one holding the weight of the world on her shoulders, never expecting anyone to lift it for her. But maybe she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The next morning, she walked into the restaurant, not as an employee, but as a woman with a decision to make. Ethan was already there, sipping a coffee in the back booth. She sat across from him, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't want to be some corporate puppet," she said. Ethan smiled. "Good. I don't want one." She exhaled. Then, "I'm in." A slow grin spread across Ethan's face. "Welcome to the team, Maggie." Over the next few weeks, Maggie's world transformed. Ethan made good on his promise. Her medical bills were wiped clean, and she finally started the treatments she had been putting off. But more than that, she found purpose. She worked directly with Ethan to overhaul the company's employee policies. They increased wages, created paid medical leave, and ensured that no worker would ever have to choose between survival and their health. And for the first time in her life, Maggie felt like she wasn't just surviving. She was living. One evening, after another long but fulfilling day, she stood beside Ethan outside the restaurant, watching the city lights flicker. "Do you ever regret going undercover?" she asked, glancing at him. Ethan shook his head. "No. It was the best decision I ever made." Maggie smirked. "Even after all those grease burns?" Ethan chuckled. "Even after the grease burns." A comfortable silence stretched between them. Maggie took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. She had spent so long fighting alone, but now she had an ally, a friend, and maybe, just maybe, a future worth fighting for. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can create the biggest change. This isn't just a story about wealth or power, it's about humanity, second chances, and standing up for what's right. What would you do? If you were in Ethan's shoes, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story moved you. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful stories to life.